So something pretty major just happened. For the very first time in American history, a former president has been forced to testify before Congress under a subpoena. We're going to break down Bill Clinton's deposition about his connections to Jeffrey Epstein, and believe me, it's a moment that has Washington and really the whole country glued to their seats. And look, this wasn't just a phrase thrown around by one side. In what's got to be a rare moment of unity these days, both Republicans and Democrats use those exact same words: a historic day. It just goes to show you the sheer weight of this situation, a former president being grilled under oath. And this is why it's such a big deal. Sure, other presidents have testified before, but they've done it voluntarily. This is the first time one has been legally compelled to show up by a congressional subpoena. That sets a huge precedent, and it totally raises the stakes for any future investigation into a former commander-in-chief. Okay, so let's get to it. What did the former president actually say? Well, after hours and hours of questioning, his entire argument really came down to one very consistent defense. This right here was the line. In his opening statement, Clinton was totally direct, telling the committee, quote, "I know what I saw and more importantly, what I didn't see. I know what I did and more importantly, what I didn't do." It was just a flat-out, straightforward denial, and it was the foundation for every single answer he gave after that. To build on that core denial, Clinton's statement really hit three key points. First, he insisted he had absolutely no idea about any of Epstein's criminal behavior. Second, he made it clear that his brief acquaintance with Epstein was over years before that 2008 guilty plea made everything public. And finally, in a pretty personal moment, he brought up his own childhood, saying that because he grew up in a home with domestic abuse, he wouldn't have just looked the other way. He would have turned Epstein in himself. Of course, this is Washington we're talking about, so the committee members had their own very strong opinions. Let's dig into how Republicans on the House Oversight Committee are framing all of this. So, the day before Bill Clinton testified, his wife, Hillary Clinton, was deposed. And Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace used some incredibly sharp language to describe how it went. She told reporters that the former Secretary of State was screaming and unhinged, which, set a really confrontational tone for the whole week. The Republican game plan seems to have a few key parts. First, they're pointing out that Hillary Clinton apparently deferred questions to her husband about a dozen times, essentially passing the buck to him. Second, they're really digging into the Clinton Global Initiative, which Epstein had reportedly bragged about helping to start. And third, they're openly saying, yep, this is a new precedent, and it's one they fully intend to use again. Well, as you can imagine, Democrats on that same committee have a completely different story. They're pushing back, and they're pushing back hard, painting this entire investigation in a very, very political light. For the Democrats, this isn't about getting to the truth about the Clintons. They say it's all about distraction. Their main argument is that this whole thing is a political stunt cooked up to pull everyone's attention away from former President Donald Trump's own reported connections with Jeffrey Epstein, connections they say are being swept under the rug. And this is where it turns into a real political chess match. The moment Republicans set this new precedent, Democrats immediately spun it around and said, okay, great. If we're deposing former presidents now, Donald Trump is next on the list. So while Republicans are zeroing in on Clinton's flights and photos, Democrats are fighting back by demanding a release of all the unedited videos and transcripts because they're convinced it'll prove their case that Trump needs to testify too. So with all this political back and forth, what are the actual facts here? What's the bigger picture we need to understand? Let's just zoom out for a second. Beyond all the political spin, this investigation really comes back to a couple of key numbers. First one, 27. That's the number of times the committee says Bill Clinton flew on Jeffrey Epstein's private plane. And then you have this number, 17. That's how many times Epstein supposedly visited the White House while Clinton was president. When you put them together, these two figures, the flights and the visits, they form the factual bedrock for the committee's questions about just how close their relationship was. This brings us to a really crucial legal idea that's hanging over this whole thing. Constitutional attorney Jonathan Turley says a lot of the public reaction to the Epstein files is based on guilt by association. The real danger, he says, is making that leap from just seeing evidence of an association, like being on a flight log or in a photo, to assuming someone is also guilty of a crime without any direct proof. This quote really nails the central problem here for everyone involved, from investigators to us, the public. As Greg Gutfeld put it, the whole scandal is like a box of tangled up wires. It's just such a perfect analogy for a mess where you have real, credible accusations all mixed up with rumors and speculation, and it's incredibly hard to pull the truth out of that tangle. And all of this leads to one massive, fundamental question. In an age where everything is so politically divided, what does real accountability even look like? When every single investigation is seen through a partisan lens, is it even possible to separate the facts from the political theater to get justice for the victims? That, right there, is the big unanswered question.